It's a Sunday afternoon in June 2020. A crowd of 15,000 people is standing in the centre of Bristol. They have marched from College Green, past the cathedral, down to Colston Avenue. On the avenue stands a bronze statue on a tall stone plinth. The statue has been here since 1895. It depicts a man in late 17th century dress, long coat, one hand on his hip, the other holding a scroll. His name is written on the plinth, Edward Colston. Someone has already spray-painted the word slave trader across the base. 3 people climb the statue. Ropes are attached to its head. The crowd pulls. The bronze figure rocks, holds, rocks again. 30 seconds after the ropes go taut, the statue falls, hitting the ground with a sound that people standing nearby will describe years later as one of the most satisfying things they ever heard. The crowd cheers. Someone kneels on the statue's neck. Then the crowd rolls it, bouncing and clanging on the cobblestones, down to the harbour side and tips it into the water. The statue sinks into the same harbour from which Colston's ships once departed. The whole thing takes less than 4 minutes. Bristol had been arguing about that statue for 25 years, about whether to remove it, about whether to add a plaque explaining who Colston was, about what the plaque should say, about who had the authority to decide, about what Bristol owed to its own history. 25 years of committees and consultations and compromises that never quite happened. The crowd on Colston Avenue solved it in 4 minutes. This moment, the rope, the fall, the splash, is what most people outside Bristol know about the city now. But to understand why it happened and what it means, you need to go back. A long way back. Back to a natural harbour on the southwest coast of England and a city that made itself over 600 years into one of the most important slave trading ports in the world. Using AI to reconstruct historical photographs and engravings, we are going to walk Bristol from its earliest origins to the city it is today. We will follow the ships across the Atlantic. We will stand on the dock in 1750 and understand exactly what is being loaded and unloaded and at what human cost. We will walk the grand Georgian streets built on that cost. We will stand in the crowd on the 7th of June 2020 and understand why a statue falling into a harbour matters as much as anything that has happened in this city since. This is the complete story of Bristol. Let's begin. It is the late 10th century, where 2 rivers meet, the Avon and the Frome, on a peninsula of raised ground above a tidal gorge. A settlement is growing. The Anglo-Saxons call it Brixtow, the place at the bridge. The bridge crosses the Avon at what will become Bristol Bridge, the point where the tidal river narrows enough to be crossed on foot. The location is remarkable. The River Avon cuts through a deep limestone gorge before reaching the Severn estuary and the open sea. The gorge protects the harbour from Atlantic storms. The tidal range of the Severn, the second highest in the world, rising and falling up to 15 metres, means ships can float in on the high tide and be left sitting on the mud at low water, their hulls fully accessible for repair and loading without dry dock equipment. Nature has built, almost perfectly, a working port. By the time of the Norman conquest in 1066, Bristol is already one of the most important towns in England. A castle rises on the headland between the rivers. A mint operates here, one of fewer than a dozen in the entire country. The population is perhaps 5,000. Bristol is already trading across the Bristol Channel to Ireland and Wales, already sending ships south along the coast to the wine ports of Bordeaux. Through the 12th and 13th centuries, Bristol grows steadily into one of the great medieval cities of England. The wool trade makes it rich. Fleeces from the Cotswolds and Somerset, shipped through Bristol to the cloth manufacturers of Flanders and Italy. Wine comes back from Bordeaux in exchange. Ships arrive and depart on every tide. The quays along the Frome and the Avon fill with warehouses. The churches go up. St. Mary Redcliffe, begun in the 13th century and extended and rebuilt repeatedly over the following 200 years, becomes one of the most spectacular parish churches in England. Queen Elizabeth I, visiting in 1574, will call it the fairest, goodliest, and most famous parish church in England. It is built not by the Crown, not by the church authorities, but by Bristol's merchant class, by men who made their money in trade and spent some of it on extraordinary stone architecture, as a permanent, very public advertisement for their own success and piety. In 1497, a Venetian navigator named Giovanni Caboto, John Cabot, as Bristol knows him, sails from the city on a small ship called the Matthew with a crew of 18 men. He is looking for a western route to Asia. He finds instead the coast of North America. He makes landfall somewhere, Newfoundland most likely, possibly Cape Breton Island, on the 24th of June, 1497. He plants the English flag. He comes back to Bristol. Bristol merchants, practical men, are less interested in the philosophical implications of a new continent than in the cod. The waters off Newfoundland are full of it. Within a decade, Bristol ships are making regular voyages to the Newfoundland fisheries, salting the catch on the shoreline, bringing it back to sell across Catholic Europe, where fast days create reliable demand. Cabot's voyage connects Bristol to the Atlantic in a way that will define the city for the next 3 centuries. The Atlantic is where the money is. Bristol is positioned on the western edge of England, closer to the Atlantic than any other major English port. This geographic advantage will make the city very rich, and then it will make the city complicit in something for which Bristol is still, in 2026, working out what exactly it owes. We need to talk about sugar. Sugar cane grows in the Caribbean. The Spanish and Portuguese have established plantations on the islands. Barbados, Jamaica, Hispaniola, worked initially by indigenous people, and then, as those populations collapse under the pressure of disease and deliberate violence, by enslaved Africans. The sugar that results is extraordinarily profitable. Europeans, once they taste it, cannot get enough of it. English planters established themselves on Barbados in 1627. They grow tobacco initially, then switch to sugar in the 1640s when the economics become clear. Sugar requires enormous amounts of continuous hand labor, planting, cutting, boiling, refining, performed in brutal heat under conditions of deliberate terror. The labor must be perpetual, controllable, and essentially free. Enslaved Africans, in the logic of the plantation owners, meet all of these requirements. Bristol merchants look at the Atlantic Triangle and understand immediately what it offers. Manufactured goods from England, cloth, iron bars, copper pots, firearms, alcohol, are worth modest amounts in England but are valuable on the West African coast. On the West African coast, these goods can be exchanged for enslaved people. Those people, transported to the Caribbean, can be sold at prices that generate enormous returns. The money from those sales buys sugar, rum, cotton, tobacco. The ships return to Bristol. The goods are sold. The profit is invested in the next voyage. 3 legs, 3 profits. The triangular trade. The Society of Merchant Venturers, Bristol's ancient trading guild, founded in 1552 and still in existence today, includes among its members the most active participants in this trade. At the height of Bristol's involvement, approximately 1/4 of the Society's members are directly engaged in slave trading. They run the port. They sit on the city council. They endow the schools and the almshouses and the churches. The civic infrastructure of Bristol, the buildings that make the city look generous and civilized, is financed by the same capital that finances the Middle Passage. Between 1698 and 1807, Bristol merchants make approximately 2,000 slave trading voyages. They transport approximately 500,000 enslaved Africans across the Atlantic. Liverpool eventually overtakes Bristol in the scale of its involvement. But Bristol is there first, and Bristol's profits from the trade run deeper into the city's institutional fabric than anywhere else in Britain. Let us walk Bristol at the height of its power. It is 1750. The city's population is about 50,000, making it the second largest in England after London. The harbour is full. On any given day, dozens of ships are moored along the quays of the Frome and the Avon. Brigs and sloops and larger vessels, their holds being loaded and unloaded by teams of dock workers. We enter from the east, following the Avon Valley down through wooded limestone gorge country. Then the valley opens and the city appears. Church towers rising above a dense mass of rooftops, smoke from 100 chimneys, the masts of ships visible above the warehouse rooflines. We cross Bristol Bridge, rebuilt in stone, shops overhanging both sides, and enter the old city. The streets are narrow and loud, carts loaded with barrels and bales compete with pedestrians and animals. The smell is of dung and river mud, and on the quays themselves, the particular sweet rotten smell of sugar coming off the West India ships. Queen Square opens to our left. This is where the money lives. Laid out in the first years of the 18th century, it is one of the largest Georgian squares in England outside London. The houses are 4 stories of dressed limestone, sash windows, ironwork railings, front doors with polished brass knockers. Inside the rooms, high ceilings, mahogany furniture from Jamaica, silver from the Americas, portraits of men in wigs hanging above marble fireplaces. Outside the windows, the ships that paid for all of it. We walk to the Exchange on Corn Street. Designed by John Wood, the Elder of Bath, and completed in 1743, it is a statement of civic confidence, a classical colonnade where Bristol's merchants conduct business in the open air. On the pavement outside the Exchange stand 4 bronze tables on stone pillars. Nails, they are called. Deals are concluded in cash on their flat surfaces. To pay on the nail, the phrase passes into the English language from this pavement, from these transactions. Some of those transactions are for human beings. A Bristol slave ship preparing for departure to West Africa carries a specific and terrible cargo: iron bars, copper rods, cotton cloth, guns and gunpowder, glass beads, alcohol. These are the goods that will be exchanged on the West African coast for people. The ship will be at sea for 6 to 8 weeks, reaching West Africa. Then weeks of coastal trading, moving from one trading post to another, exchanging goods for captives. Then the Middle Passage, 6 to 12 weeks across the Atlantic. Then the sail in Barbados or Jamaica. Then the return voyage with sugar and rum and cotton. The entire circuit takes 12 to 18 months. On a successful voyage, the profit might be 10, 20, 30% above costs. On an unsuccessful voyage, disease killing a large proportion of the enslaved people in the hold, a ship lost in a storm, prices low at point of sale, it might be nothing. The merchants of Bristol treat this as a business calculation. The human beings in the hold are the risk variable. Not everyone in Bristol accepts this. The Quakers, the Society of Friends, issue statements against the slave trade as early as the 1670s. Individual Quaker merchants withdraw from it entirely. They are a minority. The majority of Bristol's commercial class considers the trade legal, profitable, and therefore legitimate. Edward Colston is born in Bristol in 1636. His family moved to London when he is 6. He makes his fortune as a merchant and rises through the ranks of the Royal African Company, eventually becoming its deputy governor. The company holds, until 1698, the monopoly on English trade with West Africa, which means, centrally, the trade in enslaved people. Colston personally oversees the transportation of more than 84,000 enslaved Africans, including 12,000 children, across the Atlantic. More than 19,000 of them die on the crossing. Their bodies are thrown overboard. He becomes, in the final decades of his life, an extravagantly generous philanthropist. He funds schools in Bristol, Colston's School, founded 1710, continuing to this day. He funds almshouses. He endows hospitals. He gives money to the city with a generosity that Bristol chooses, for the next 2 centuries, to treat as the whole story. In 1895, a statue is erected on Colston Avenue. The inscription describes him as one of the most virtuous and wise sons of the city. There is no mention of the 84,000 people. There is no mention of the 19,000 who did not survive the crossing. The campaign to address the statue begins quietly in the 1990s. Community groups raise concerns, councillors debate. Proposals for a contextualizing plaque go back and forth for years. The wording cannot be agreed. Some want the slave trade mentioned prominently. Others want the philanthropy given equal weight. The Society of Merchant Venturers resists. The Colston Society, which organizes the annual memorial service, resists. The debate circles and circles and never resolves. In 1996, a Bristol music promoter names a new concert venue, the Colston Hall. Within a few years, artists are declining to perform there because of the name. The venue's management enters a years-long process of deciding whether to rename it. It becomes the Bristol Beacon in 2020. Meanwhile, Bristol's slave trade history, long acknowledged in academic circles but never fully absorbed into the public story of the city, begins to receive closer attention. The International Slavery Museum in Liverpool opens in 2007 and shows what a direct reckoning with this history looks like. Bristol watches and continues to debate. Then, on the 25th of May, 2020, a Minneapolis police officer kneels on the neck of a black man named George Floyd. He keeps his knee there for 9 minutes and 29 seconds. George Floyd dies. The video is seen by hundreds of millions of people within days. The Black Lives Matter movement, which has existed since 2013, explodes into global visibility. Demonstrations take place in cities across the United States, across Europe, across the world. The 7th of June, 2020. Bristol, a Black Lives Matter demonstration assembles on College Green, in front of the cathedral. 15,000 people march. They move down toward the city centre. They reach Colston Avenue. The statue has a canvas cover over it. It had been targeted by egg throwers in previous weeks. Protesters tear the canvas off. 3 people climb the statue. Ropes are attached to its head. The crowd pulls. 30 seconds. The statue falls. The crowd cheers. Someone kneels on the bronze neck. Then the crowd rolls it across the road and tips it over the harbour side wall. The statue of Edward Colston enters the water of Bristol Harbour, the same harbour his ships departed from, the same water his prophets crossed, and sinks. 4 people are charged with criminal damage. They become known as the Colston Four. Their trial takes place in January 2022. The defence argues that the statue itself constituted an act of intimidation and harassment against Bristol's black community, that leaving it in place was the real damage. The jury acquits all 4, unanimously. The statue is recovered from the harbour by Bristol City Council. It is displayed briefly in 2021 and then goes into storage. In 2024, city councillors vote to put it on permanent display at the M Shed, Bristol's City History Museum on the harbour side. It lies on its back behind glass, the spray paint still visible, the dents from the cobblestones still in the bronze. Around it are displayed the placards from the demonstration and a full account of why it was pulled down. It is one of the most visited exhibits in the museum. The plinth on Colston Avenue stands empty. An updated plaque now acknowledges Colston's role in the slave trade and describes the events of the 7th of June, 2020. Various proposals for what to put on the plinth have been debated. A sculpture of Jen Reed, one of the protesters, arm raised, stood there for one night in July 2020 before Bristol City Council removed it. The question of what goes there next has not been resolved. Perhaps it shouldn't be resolved quickly. Some questions deserve to stay open. But while all of this has been happening, the debates and the demonstrations and the statue and the trial, Bristol itself has been quietly becoming something remarkable. The harbour side that went quiet when the docks closed in 1975 has been gradually transformed. The SS Great Britain, the iron-hulled, screw-propelled ocean steamship designed by Isambard Kingdom Brunel and launched from Bristol in 1843, the template for every large ship built since, was rescued from the Falkland Islands in 1970 and brought back to the dry dock where it was built. It is there today, restored, its hull preserved beneath a sheet of plate glass fitted precisely at the waterline. The Arnolfini Arts Centre, the Watershed Cinema and Media Centre, the M Shed. The Tate is not here. That went to Liverpool, but the artistic energy is unmistakable. The Clifton Suspension Bridge, Brunel's masterwork spanning the Avon Gorge, 245 feet above the river, completed in 1864, 2 years after his death, catches the last light every evening over the limestone cliffs. It is still one of the most beautiful engineered structures in Britain. Brunel designed it in 1831, saw it stall for decades due to funding failures, and died before it was finished. Bristol's relationship with Brunel, celebrating him, abandoning him, rescuing him, is a compressed version of the city's relationship with its own history. The BBC Natural History Unit has been based in Bristol since the 1950s. Blue Planet, Planet Earth, every David Attenborough series that has ever made you feel simultaneously awed and frightened about the state of the world. Made here, on the edge of the city, by people who have spent 70 years filming the natural world from this one place. Bristol has a claim to having produced more internationally watched natural history documentary than anywhere else on Earth. The universities, the University of Bristol and the University of the West of England, together educate more than 60,000 students. The city is young, creative, argumentative. It has one of the most vibrant street art scenes in Europe. Banksy, who is almost certainly from Bristol, got his start on these walls, and the tradition he represents continues in the murals and stencils that cover the city's surfaces. Bristol's relationship with public art, what goes on its walls, what stands on its plinths, whose image occupies public space, has never been more alive or more contested. The city consistently ranks as one of the best places to live in the United Kingdom. And yet inequality sits inside that prosperity like a stone. The north of the city, St. Paul's, Lawrence Hill, Easton, the areas where the Caribbean and South Asian communities who came to Bristol in the post-war decades settled, are among the most deprived urban areas in England. The same city that produces the Natural History Unit and the Clifton Suspension Bridge and the Watershed Cinema produces in its northern postcode areas some of the worst child poverty statistics in the country. Bristol has always had two cities inside it. The division is not new, it is just more visible now because more people are willing to see it. The Colston 4 trial changed something in Bristol. Not everything, but something. For most of its history, Bristol told itself a particular story about who it was, a city of merchants and mariners, of innovation and culture, of Brunel and Cabot, and the Suspension Bridge, and the Cathedral, and the natural history films. The slave trade was there in the history books, acknowledged, not hidden, but not front and center. Not something you encountered on a daily walk through the city unless you were already looking for it. The statue going into the harbour put it front and center. Not just for a day. The trial made it front and center again. The acquittal made it front and center again. The debate about the plinth keeps it there. A city cannot undo what it has done. Bristol cannot restore the 84,000 people. It cannot repay the 19,000 who did not survive the crossing. It cannot erase the 2,000 voyages or give back the profits or rebuild the lives that the system dismantled. What it can do is look at what actually happened. Look at who built the Georgian houses and the exchange and the almshouses and what it cost. Look at the statue lying on its back with slave trader sprayed across it and understand that both things are true at the same time. The philanthropy happened, and the 84,000 people happened, and you do not get to choose which one counts. Bristol is still working this out. The plinth is still empty. The harbour is still here. The tide still rises and falls 15 meters twice a day, the same as it did when the slave ships floated in and out. The water moves through the gorge and out into the Severn estuary and into the Atlantic, and it goes where it always goes. It connects Bristol to the world. It always has. The question that Bristol is still asking, that every city built on this kind of wealth is still asking, is what kind of connection that is and what it now requires. The Clifton Suspension Bridge is lit at night. Standing in the gorge below it, looking up, you can see the curve of the iron chains against the dark. Brunel drew that curve by hand in 1831. He never saw it finished. Some things take longer than one lifetime. That is not an excuse, it is just a fact. Thanks for watching. If this walk through Bristol moved you, subscribe and let us know in the comments. Which city should we walk through next? We'll see you in the past.